Good afternoon, and welcome to the 5th meeting of the Communications, Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council, which I formally declare to be open. Thank you all for being here today. I ask that everyone on Teams turn off their video and microphone unless speaking. And for those in the room, the button on your microphone will be red to indicate it's live. And with that, I'd like to introduce Chairman Brendan Carr of the FCC.
Great, thanks. I heard my name, so I gotta come up. Thank you so much for the introduction. Great to see you all in the building, in person. One of the things we've been doing the last couple months here is making sure that we return the building back to our sort of pre-COVID standard of having folks here, and it's been great to see. I think it's good for groups like this as well that come in, that make sure the FCC is fully staffed when you do it. So as you indicated, welcome. This is the 5th meeting of the 9th CSRIC, which I think is a lot. If you have at least 5 times 9, it's some sort of big number. But I know all of you have really important day jobs, and so I really just want to start by again expressing my thanks and appreciation to the time that you put into this. The work that CSRIC has accomplished through all of the different iterations of it is really impressive. And so thanks I know a lot of you are multiple CSRIC people. I don't know if you get like a pin per CSRIC. We're like CSRIC IX at this point, but that'd be pretty cool if we could do that.
This is my second CSRIC and all I got was a lousy t-shirt.
Yes, exactly. Someone will get on that for you. But today I'm pleased that CSRIC is going to vote on 2 reports today that have been prepared under its charter. These reports actually touch on a couple of the key priorities for me as chair, both the use of AI and how that interacts with our networks, and making sure that Americans have access to cutting-edge 911 services. So your first report, titled Threats Posed by Artificial Intelligence, Machine Learning Systems to the Security, Reliability, and Integrity of Networks, and How to Overcome the Risks. It's going to be an important one. In this report, CSRIC focuses on how attackers can make use of AI to exploit vulnerabilities in communications networks, potentially threatening our national security. This is CSRIC's first foray into AI, and so I think everyone is getting educated and up to speed. I'm really glad to be pulling your expertise on this. If you step back and think about AI as a general matter, it's obviously an emerging area, and it's one where we're focused not just here at the FCC, but across the administration. President Trump has made clear that he wants the United States to lead the way on AI. He wants us to have the gold standard approach to it. We don't need to go about it alone necessarily. We welcomed our allies around the globe to join with us in creating this gold standard approach. But it's also clear to us that our foreign adversaries have other visions in mind when it comes to AI, including for nefarious purposes, including using it to exploit vulnerabilities in networks. And so our foreign adversaries are hard at work. I think the Communist Party of China, among them, has focused a lot of their efforts on AI. And we've seen a lot of attacks at our infrastructure without getting into skiff-level briefings. Suffice to say that I'm eager to see your recommendations and how we can continue to work to bolster our networks when it comes to the threats posed by AI. Again, like any new technology, it's not inherently good or bad, but it can be used for great things, and that's what we're trying to push, including across the Trump administration. And it can be used to present challenges, and that's why I want to see what the mitigation measures are that you're focused on. The second report today is connecting stalled 911 calls through alternate network options. And I think, obviously, one of the most important things that we can do for public safety is to ensure that calls to 911 always go through. And as I've spent time outside of the Beltway, not just in this job, but in the prior jobs that I've had in this building, I make it a point to visit our 911 call centers and hear directly from people about the challenges that they see. And I think your report here is going to be focused on some really important issues and how we can sort of integrate emergency calling processes and ensure that 911 services continue to be as reliable and effective as possible, particularly as we see all these technologies and wireless devices that can't make a 911 call on their primary network. They're going to become capable of searching for alternate options to successfully complete the call. So thank you all for your work on that as well. Finally, CSRIC is going to receive a progress update on ongoing work that examines how to address the security and reliability risks unique to emerging 6G networks and services, which, again, will help make sure that the United States continues to lead the way as we head towards this next generation of wireless services. CSRIC's work is important to the FCC and to our mission. It helps us ensure that our communications infrastructure and networks are secure, resilient, and always operational. The diligence and commitment that CSRIC's members and working groups have shown through the years is heartening, and we have therefore, tasked you with some thorny issues to solve and to recommend and address. And again, you all have my sincere thanks and appreciation for the work that you put into this. This is a group where I think the proportion of your recommendations actually becoming actionable by the commission is exceptionally high. And I think that's one of the most important things that you can look at from a group like this is that your work, your effort is something that we rely on. It makes a difference in the work of the agency. And again, just want to express my thanks and appreciation to everything you do and look forward to the final products as they get across the finish line. So thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce Acting Public Safety Homeland Security Bureau Chief Zenji Nakazawa.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. Just to clear the record, to set it straight, I do work for Suzanne. So, for those who don't know, I became the acting bureau chief a few months ago. But just so you know, it's not my first time. I've had the honor of actually working with CSRIC working groups before. And so I know all of the hard work and expertise that goes into it. So I really thank you for coming out here today. I do want to echo the chairman's remarks and take a moment to recognize what you accomplished. The reports here being presented really reflect, to me, the very best of what happens when some of the brightest minds get together and solve real-world problems with real-world consequences. So your work will help ultimately inform the FCC as we develop thoughtful, forward-looking policies that promote innovation, save lives, and keep our country safer and more secure. On behalf of the Bureau and the FCC, I want to thank you for your hard work that went into prepping these reports. I know it required significant amount of time, your thought, and deep collaboration, but believe me, your dedication and commitment will make our nation far better off. I also want to recognize staff who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make this CSRIC a success. They are Logan Bennett, Kurian Jacob, Ken Carlson, Ryan Hedgepeth, and Zach the Lion DeLeo. And finally, a special thank you to co-chairs, Billy Bob Brown, Todd Pyatt, and especially our designated federal officer, Suzanne Cameron, who keeps us all in line. Thank you for your steady leadership. Thank you all, and welcome. Let's get to it. Thanks.
Well, thank you, and I'll reiterate the thank you to everybody in this group. We've delivered 2 on-time reports, and not without a lot of hard work from everybody involved, so thank you so much. I'm going to kick it off with roll call here, and I'm just going to go through the folks in person, so anybody remote, we're taking your names separately. Rob Alderfer. Rob? Oh, he's a I'm sorry, this is somebody on Teams, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, got it. All right, I'm sorry. Mike Barnes. Okay. Richard Barron.
Present.
Present. Remote. You're present remote. I'm sorry. All right.
Brandon, the first name.
Okay. Brandon Abley.
Present.
Alexander Blaskin. Here. Wade Buckner. Here. Douglas Campbell. Douglas Campbell. Andrew Drozd. Present. Luis Eduardo. Luis Eduardo. BJ, saw you. Natniel Habteshian. Natniel. Michael Hayes? Here. Stephen Hayes? He's remote. Jason Hogg? Ankur Kapoor?
John Hunter filling in for Hunter.
Okay. Lauren Kravitz? Douglas Montgomery? Douglas Montgomery? Brian Murray? Jared Owen? Jared Owen? Sean Scott? Sean Scott? Brian Tegmeyer? Riken Thacker? Riken Thacker? Or Robert Cantu as his alternate? Okay. George Woodward? George Woodward? Oh, it looks like he's remote. Henry Young? Here. That is it, I believe, for the,
That sounds like we have quorum.
yep.
Yeah, we definitely have quorum.
Okay. Great, so we have a quorum. Just a couple quick rules here. So after each report presentation concludes, the floor will be open for questions, comments, and deliberation. Just place your tent card up here if you're in the room on end, or use the hand raise function on Teams to indicate your desire to speak. So without further ado, Jason and VJ, let's kick us off for Working Group 1.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Both Jason and I would like to thank the CSRIC Council, the working group members, both online and in person. Okay. Sorry about that.
Take two.
Take two. Good afternoon, everybody. Both Jason and I would like to thank the CSRIC Council, the working group members, both online and in person, for an opportunity for us to present the first report in our working group. Next slide, please. The fundamental question we set to answer in the fall of 2024 was, how does AI/ML affect the security and reliability of communication networks, how to mitigate the challenges that the technology poses. The complexity in answering this question is evident by the complicated domains of what we are trying to study. Both 5G and AI/ML are, in and of themselves, very complex domains. Next slide, please. So I'll provide a brief background on AI and 5G as we proceed. The origins of AI can be traced back to a 1956 workshop held in Dartmouth. The aim of this workshop was to essentially understand how computers could be taught to understand language, could form abstractions and concepts, and essentially solve the problems that humans can solve. The field saw some good advances in this direction. Eliza was a psychotherapist or a psychiatrist that would talk to its users in natural language, and this was back in 1956. Shrudlu, the next little blocks you see on the screen, was a virtual environment that allowed users to use natural language to control the placement of blocks. So a user could say, place the red block on top of the white disk, and the system would do that. So it was natural language processing that was being studied very heavily at this time. The interesting thing about Shrudlu was that it demonstrated two things: reasoning and memory. Systems demonstrated reasoning through symbolic manipulation then followed. We had the general problem solver. And essentially what these systems did was they were able to prove mathematical theorems and solve abstract problems. Around this time, Frank Rosenblatt, I believe in Cornell, through a grant through the Navy, started to look into what he called perceptrons. This was really the precursor of what we call today deep neural networks. So a perceptron, essentially, given an input pattern, would happily discriminate the data into one of two classes. The thing here was that at this point, we knew how the network can learn, but we just did not have the capacity to create these larger networks. We did not know how to train larger networks. That came much later. But the seeds for this were formed back in the time frame. So despite these promises, the early AI precursors failed to live up to their expectations for two reasons: the lack of computation power and the complexity of the language. Because they did not perform as expected once they were put out in the field, interest in AI started to decrease, and the field entered its first AI winter. The AI winter lasted from 1974 to 1980, and resurgence in AI bounced back in 1980 in the form of expert systems, which essentially were systems that used domain-specific rules to emulate human decision-making. So at this point, we had experts doing various things. Mycin was an expert that diagnosed bacterial infections. Dendrol was an expert system that automated chemical analysis. And XCON was an expert system that configured VAX computers. Some of you might actually remember Digital Equipment Corporation and VAX computers. So XCON was an expert system that configured these computers. Again, by 1990, the industry was not able to solve some problems with these expert systems. Specifically, they were fairly brittle, and knowledge acquisition, knowledge quantification, and knowledge gathering came at a high cost. So because of this, AI entered its second winter. The second winter lasted from 1990 to 2000. The first 10 years of the new millennium were characterized by what I have written there as cautious optimism. AI was still a word that people did not want to use very loudly, and the researchers in this area at this point either referred to their work as machine learning or informatics. All of this changed around 2007 with the advent of the ImageNet dataset. The ImageNet dataset was a dataset that was gathered, image dataset that was gathered by Professor Fei-Fei Li. At that time, she was at Princeton through an NSF grant. And this image data set contained millions of images, and each image was labeled. This is an apple, this is a pear, this is a child, this is a bicycle. Once this labeled data set became available, it led to the profusion of AI that we see today. We had AI that could recognize these images, and that led to work in understanding language much better, which led to what we now see as ChatGPT, Claude, Llama, and other of these large language models. So I think AI is here. The question is, how are we going to use it to our advantage? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is one rendition of where AI is today if you were to taxonomize it. The outermost rectangle you see in yellow is artificial intelligence as people envisioned it in 1950s. The innermost rectangle you see is the focus of today's AI in the form of generative AI. This is where most of the focus is, both from the research as well as the industry. Next slide, please. So that said, I'll now focus a little bit on the wireless network concepts in 5G, just to give you some of the idea between what the major parts of the 5G network are. So in a 5G network, essentially you have two major parts. One is called the RAN, or radio access network, and the other is called the mobile core. At the extreme left, you see what are labeled as UEs, or user equipments. These are your cell phones, but they do not have to be cell phones. They could be, an equipment, a 5G equipment in a car. They could be IoT devices. They could be tablets. They could be stationary, or they could be moving. But these are essentially the endpoints that want to attach themselves to a 5G network to do some processing. So basically, when you power on a UE, the UE first searches the radio network to find a cell, or as it's called in 5G, a G node B. Once it has found a G node B, it talks to the G node B to get the G node B to give it access to the network. As part of that protocol, the network and the UE mutually authenticate each other, and they exchange a number of characteristics, including encryption keys, so that the data that goes through the UE can be encrypted. Once the UE is admitted inside the network, the UE is given an IP address, and essentially a tunnel is established from the UE all the way through the internet that you see on the right, through the backbone network, which feeds into the core network. So the backbone network essentially is a network that is between the radio network and the core network. So all of the data coming on radio interfaces is then converted to wired network, carried through the backbone network to the mobile core. And once the data is the mobile core can then route it and provide services. So 5G in the mobile core orchestrates everything behind the scene. It allows a mobile into the network. It keeps track of where the mobile is if the mobile is roaming. It keeps track of quality of service. It keeps track of policies, encryption keys. So the 5G core is, in a sense, the brain of the network. Sitting at the top, you see something called OSS, or Operations Support System. OSS is essentially a set of software tools and platforms to allow operators to manage and configure their network appropriately. If the network needs to grow or shrink, or if the network needs to adopt some new policies, the OSS, the 5G operators through OSS can enable that to happen in the network. So big picture here, from a 5G perspective, there are many moving parts, but a RAN, OSS, 5G core, and UEs are important concepts that we'll come to again as Jason continues to talk. Next slide, please. So in our working group, we have 3 deliverables. The first deliverable is what we are presenting today, which is report on threats posed by artificial intelligence, machine learning systems to the security, reliability, and integrity of the network, and recommendations on how to overcome them. We have 2 more reports. The second one is recommended best practices for the FCC and industry on ethical and practical uses of AI. And the third one is best practices for the use of AI in public safety networks. Work for both reports 2 and 3 is currently in progress. Next slide, please. These are the members of our working group, and I, of course, will not go through each one of them because I simply cannot read them, but I think everybody knows who they are. Next slide, please, and these are the alternates. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jason to continue the talk.
Fantastic, thank you. So the next 6 or 7 slides provide a high-level summary of some of the actual concepts that are actually discussed within the paper, not intended to be comprehensive. I'm sorry, let me finish this. Sorry, I'm the soft-spoken Australian. So the next few slides are intended to actually provide a high-level summary of some of the content that's inside the paper, not intended to be comprehensive. So do sort of suggest if any of these areas are interesting, take a look at the paper and sort of drill in. So obviously the background for this discussion is next generation 5G networks enabling significantly larger number of devices to be attaching, enabling much greater, more complex scenarios, communications, videos, live streaming, real-time communications, those sorts of things. And so when managing a network of this scale and complexity, AI provides significant opportunities for actually complementing existing management and operational practices and enabling new and sort of more efficient and sort of productive ways of operating the networks. That being said, AI does also introduce new security risks and vulnerabilities that people should be aware of, tracking, and putting into place appropriate mitigations. What we tried to do within our working group within this report was take a look at a number of different technology areas, identify some representative scenarios, and then take a look at some sample threats, vulnerabilities, and mitigations with which to provide sort of an overview of some of the areas that people should be looking at. One of the challenges that we had when forming this paper was it's an extremely large domain. Telco network, all of the technologies that go within it, AI, all of these sort of innovations that are occurring in this space, extremely comprehensive. So just not possible to cover sort of full depth and breadth that I think as a working group we would have liked to if we had unlimited time. So I think as people look at the paper, we hope that people sort of see it as an overview and a sample of some of the actual key scenarios that are enablers, threats that maybe should be considered, vulnerabilities, and mitigations. What we wanted to do as a working group as well was build on top of existing best practices that the industry had already created. So some papers from the Department of Homeland Security and NIST were critical sort of foundational materials for ramping up the working group and providing sort of a good background for the rest of the paper. Next slide, please. So we will, at the end of this talk, we'll go through some specific recommendations that the working group has sort of provided. As we go through the next couple of slides, there are a couple of high-level findings that we do think are sort of interesting for people to be aware of. First of all, access control remains important, not unsurprisingly, and sort of as part of a foundational zero trust infrastructure that we need, needs to be in place for any secure sort of system nowadays. Thinking about and understanding access control, not just to the core systems, but potentially starting all the way at the start of the process of adopting AI, thinking about the data itself, where you're getting the training data from, who's had access to it, some of those sorts of things. So access control remains a sort of critical part of securing the system. Continuous monitoring, and specifically starting to think about use of sort of anomaly detection types of AI capabilities is also critical, just due to the varied nature of the actual types of attacks and vulnerabilities that exist. It's also important, as with any software-based system, to actually regularly assess and ensure you're running the latest versions of software as well, just to make sure that you've sort of you've sort of addressed any sort of vulnerabilities that may have sort of existed, and sort of ensure you're running the latest versions of software. Also really important as companies are sort of looking to adopt sort of AI-based technologies, really understand how best we evaluate the capabilities that the models are actually providing, analyze them, and think about how to actually support them in a production environment. Without that, it's hard to actually understand how to determine if the models themselves are actually doing what you actually expect them to do. And of course, as with any system when you're adding additional functionality into a network, you want to understand what the actual resourcing implications are to make sure you've got sufficient capacity. Next slide, please. So before we jump into some of the scenarios that were sort of mentioned, it's sort of worth thinking about, one of the things we struggled with was how best to actually start to structure the paper itself. And this is where one of the actual Department of Homeland Security's papers, the Framework for AI for Critical Infrastructure, provided a really great foundation for us. As we were sort of thinking about sort of what are the different threats that exist because of AI or as a result of adopting AI, the paper itself had sort of a nice sort of three-layered sort of strategy of sort of categorizing AI risks. The first is where adversaries can use AI to their advantage. You could actually use AI to evaluate some code, to look for vulnerabilities that may not have actually been noticed in the past, or you could even look at existing vulnerabilities and work out how potentially multiple sort of existing vulnerabilities, if used together, could actually create a new vulnerability. The second one was AI systems themselves. As AI systems are being built, they're critically dependent on data, the labeling of the data, the management of the model generation process, and the deployment and operation. So actually really understanding what threats exist to AI systems was sort of the second category of vulnerabilities we took a look at. And then finally, and again, sort of as with any AI, as with any software system, as you're actually adding new capabilities, a failure to actually understand how to actually test them properly could also obviously result in vulnerabilities within the actual deployed system. So then sort of as we were thinking about sort of how do we actually go about sort of identifying vulnerabilities as a result of AI, it was really important to actually understand the AI life cycle. And so that's the second sort of set of points that you see here in the diagram on the right. And this talks about the stages that are involved in building an AI model and then deploying it and operating it. And so each of those stages is an area where either the people building the model or the people using the model need to be aware of to actually ensure that they've got the right sort of like tests and practices in place to actually ensure, again, as with any software system, that you've basically got the right controls in place to make sure you've got the confidence to take a production dependency. The Appendix A of the paper, there were actually probably 6 or 7 different really great resources that we looked at that actually could have provided foundation for the paper, cited those in the appendix, and definitely recommend for folks that actually want to go super deep and really understand specific threats at each of those phases of development. For example, there's some really good resources in the appendix. All right, next slide, please. So as Vijay was sort of outlining, AI and the sort of telco network design, very large, very complex areas. We were fortunate, we had, I think, something like 30, 31 different members within our working group. And so we were challenged with how best to actually take advantage of these folks. And so what we ended up doing was taking sort of an overview of the sort of 5G network and identifying 5 or 6 different sort of key areas of investigation. There were actually a couple more that were also identified, but they were either ruled out of scope or we just didn't have sort of sufficient time to cover. So we basically have one group of folks working on the sort of the UEs, how AI has been adopted and threats that exist there, the RAN, the backhaul network, the mobile core, and OSS. And we'll, in one of the next slides, we'll actually talk a little bit at a high level about each of those, give some examples of each of the sort of scenarios that could be considered there. Next slide, please. So this slide summarizes, so again, we sort of, we broke the working group up. We've listed the leads and the members, and super grateful, by the way, to actually all of the folks that actually spent a ton of time. Sometimes we had folks in the working group in each of these technology areas that actually did have experience. In other cases, they didn't, and so then they actually spent time ramping up. And so the list of the areas and the folks sort of that actually helped out sort of are listed there. I also want to call out, Vijay and myself actually also want to call out, I'm sorry, really the last 4 weeks, I think our editorial team has worked almost around the clock. And it was basically pulling together the set of information that came from these different working groups, as well as the feedback that we received during the review processes, and creating a readable paper. Couldn't have done it without the editorial team. So Tim, Peter, Lauren, thank you very much. Next slide, please. So what we wanted to do on this slide was the paper's got a much more thorough analysis of scenarios, threats and vulnerabilities to be aware of. On this slide, what we've tried to do is just capture a couple of examples. And I think Vijay's going to walk through a couple of the areas, and then I'll walk through a few more.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jason. So as Jason said, we divided the working group up into essentially what we call technology areas, and each technology area corresponded with one of the big 5G subsystems. So I'll talk about the UE. The UE, in a sense, is the most visible part of the 5G network. The UE is how a user interacts. The UE here means user equipment or the cell phone. The UE is how the user interacts with the network. And increasingly, UEs are now starting to support large language models, or in terms of UEs, because these models have to be small enough to fit on the UE, people have been calling them smaller language models, or SLMs. But these SLMs now run on the UE. So imagine that task completion is one of the use cases for these UEs. And what I mean by task completion is I can pick up my phone and I can say, record the following message and send it to Jason in an email. So now, in order for this task to be completed, there is a number of subtasks. One, the recorder application has to get started on the phone. I have to speak in. The recorder application has to save that file somewhere on the phone. Then the email application has to come in the picture. It'll create an email, attach the file, and then the contact application has to be consulted to find what Jason's email is. So as you can see, there is a number of these agents that are cooperating with each other, trying to provide a service, a task decomposition service. So you can imagine that the threat surface for all these agents, as they are accessing various applications and various contact information on the phone, could lead to a much larger attack surface. And as technologists, one of the things we want to do is not necessarily to inhibit an innovation in this place, because innovation will continue. But what we need to do is to see how we can structure that innovation such that all of the stakeholders are happy with what is, with privacy, with respect to security, and respect to any other characteristics that are important to that stakeholder. So from that perspective, the risks of this technology are apparent. The mitigation is also apparent, because you can imagine access controls, you can imagine running the SLM in a sandbox. So there are some mitigations that we can definitely use. But as an industry, we need to be cognizant of what we have from the mitigation point of view and how we can deploy them such that all of the stakeholders are indeed satisfied with the service, right, without inhibiting innovation. The second example I'll give is in the RAN. In the 5G RAN, there's this concept called network slicing. And essentially, network slicing is the ability of the network to recognize that there's going to be a set of UEs that are going to require different quality of service from the network. Imagine that we had some IoT devices that were sending a lot of data, high-frequency data, high volume, and high velocity. If they're using the 5G network can recognize this and create a network slice in the radio spectrum and dedicate this network slice to these UEs. So you can imagine AI playing a role here, because the AI could be trained to recognize this, create a network slice, deploy the network slice, manage the network slice. When the IoT devices are done, it can then bring the network slice down. So again, as you can imagine here, the attack surface is large. If we want to train this AI, then the AI has to be trained on such that model poisoning doesn't happen. In AI, model poisoning essentially is the idea that when we are training the model, you can give it suspect data to train, and that would then cause the model to behave differently than what you expect. There's also model evasion, where you can cause the model to drift and do certain different things over a period of time. So as these models are deployed in the network and as they are monitored, again, we need to make sure that all of the stakeholders are satisfied with how these models are running. And there are known mitigations against both data poisoning as well as model evasion. The trick for us is going to be how are we going to deploy it and ensure that the network continues to provide the innovation and the services without inhibiting any stakeholder.
Excellent. So then the next component within the actual network is the backhaul, which obviously connects the actual RAN with the mobile core itself. One of the scenarios, so many scenarios where AI could be applied. One of the scenarios I'll cover just for illustrative purposes is that of predictive maintenance. So predictive maintenance is an area which allows us to actually take data feeds coming out of devices, routers, border gateway devices, those sorts of things, and look for patterns that may indicate that the device is about to fail. Obviously, if you can remove a device from the network before it does fail, you can sort of decrease any potential outage time or decrease capacity that could affect an end user's experience. So a very promising area for sort of applying AI. From a threats and vulnerabilities perspective, you can imagine that the actual models themselves are critically dependent on the output information coming out of the routers, gateway devices. If anybody was able to actually tamper with the data coming out of those devices, you could obviously impact the recommendation that the actual predictive models are actually creating, leading to potentially false positives, network devices being removed from a network unnecessarily, decreased capacity. Mitigations for that come back to, again, protecting the assets that you're actually analyzing, in this case, the system data, the log data, and ensuring sort of access controls are in place, as well as all of the protections that need to be in place for the core models as they're developed as well. The next area is the 5G core, the backbone, the brains of the network, if you will. So in the 5G space, 3GPP has actually mandated a set of standards now, or a standard way to actually emit telemetry, and that's called NWDAF, with the goal being to actually start to actually develop an ecosystem of analytics engines, capabilities, and now more recently sort of enabling AI actually to be applied as an extension of NWDAF. So sort of promising in terms of a standardized mechanism for actually emitting telemetry. One of the challenges within the working group that we faced, though, was that there's very limited adoption of NWDAF to date. So as promising it is, it's not widely adopted. And so without having a standardized ability to actually emit data, which allows you to build standardized models, there's actually a dearth of sort of AI models. There's sort of a very limited ecosystem, which is then challenging because that's actually slowing down sort of the ability to actually start testing, evaluating, comparing different sources of models, those sorts of things. And finally, in the OSS space, again, lots of great sort of opportunity. So OSS is about provisioning, managing the actual network, devices and the services running on the network, significant opportunities to apply AI. It's sort of probably focus on, again, sort of one of the areas maybe around sort of network configuration tuning. And again, sort of the models themselves there, as they're trained, if somebody's got the ability to actually modify the data that the models are being trained on, then you could unduly influence the actual output of the models under certain circumstances. So it may even be that the model appears to actually work for some period of time, and then sort of under certain circumstances it stops working. So again, the actual understanding, the actual data used to train the model, and actually testing under different scenarios are sort of really good sort of mitigations that need to be considered. So this slide was intended just to provide a couple of examples to actually illustrate the deeper content that's in the paper. And the paper itself, again, was just intended just to actually provide sort of a summary of some of the areas. So we hope that was sort of illustrative in terms of the role that the different sort of technology areas played, as well as how AI can be used, some threats to be considered, and some mitigations. Next slide, please. PJ.
So on this slide, essentially, we give a basic idea of where the threats are occurring. The threats can occur through AI, so AI can cause some of these threats. The threats can be mitigated by AI. So this slide is not meant to be comprehensive, but just meant to give you a quick example that of the three taxonomies that we used on where threats can occur, and whether AI is causing those threats or whether AI can help mitigate those threats. You can see that that it is a wide spectrum, right? Jason, do you want to add anything to this slide?
No, that's great.
Next slide, please.
All right, so now what we tried to do is just summarize some of the recommendations that the working group sort of formed as it sort of analyzed each of the areas it was working on. The first and possibly most important is to actually recognize that you need to start with a secure foundation. So any system that's adopting AI obviously needs to actually start thinking about how the system itself is actually secured. And that's where things like the zero trust principles, verify, authenticate, operating with least privilege access, and assuming breach are sort of critical sort of principles for thinking about as you actually evaluate the security of a system, as well as a system sort of enabled with AI. Ensuring access controls and data protection exist in all places. And again, because of that sort of assumed breach mentality, starting to think about what if an attacker was on the network, do you have the right levels of protection in place? Data protection, you want to be thinking about it at rest, so any data that you're actually storing, including training data, as well as in transit between the various components within the system. And then obviously sort of thinking about taking advantage of standardized security protocols, absolutely critical versus sort of custom where failures sort of tend to exist. So defenses against AI. So it's obviously AI-based attacks can make even the smallest vulnerabilities combined with an understanding of different code paths and maybe potentially other small vulnerabilities combined a new sort of threat vector. And so that's really important to actually understand both from a defensive and from an offensive sort of posture. Defensively, you need to know that basically vulnerabilities that you may have overlooked in the past probably need to actually have a second look at. Offensively, we should be using AI to actually start to actually look at different code paths where maybe security vulnerabilities exist in light of existing security vulnerabilities as well to help sort of reprioritize patches that may not have actually been deployed in the past. AI deployment best practices. The paper talks a little bit about sort of data protection, encryption, integrity, starting to think about data provenance as well, especially in light of sort of custom models that might be getting generated. Output testing and validation, so really thinking hard about sort of as you would any system, as you're introducing new capabilities, what's your sort of success criteria and ensuring you test for it under different sort of situations. And then sort of starting to think about supply chain, specifically for models, where's the data coming from, who's owning and managing the model creation, and do you trust that partner, for example. And then from an awareness perspective, again, this sort of comes back to that NWDAF sort of topic we were talking briefly about was, in order to actually get more AI models deployed, really do need to actually ensure that there's sort of more standardized telemetry, which enables an ecosystem of models to be created, which allows operators to actually have choice in selecting and evaluating. And it's that selecting and evaluating that will also allow you to actually look for idiosyncrasies between models that will basically could actually be an anomaly that maybe you don't want. And so then obviously in addition to that, sort of just promoting sort of comprehensive AI education and awareness to ensure sort of both the opportunities and the threats are clear. I guess there's also a footnote here, which is just to say that the recommendations are intended to be voluntary, it's sort of intended to actually shed light on these, and then sort of each of the parties, as they're sort of exposed to these threats or issues, should be thinking about the mitigations as appropriate for their organization.
Next slide, please. So in conclusion, we are looking at two very complex ecosystems, and AI changes the game a bit. If you look at computer science as a discipline, so far we have encouraged determinism. When a program runs, we try to understand its behavior and try to make its output to be deterministic. AI changes that equation. These are probabilistic models. Because they are probabilistic, we know that they will be wrong in certain cases. There's going to be a false positive, there's going to be a false negative. The question that we have to ask ourselves as a technologist is, what is the cost of a false positive or a false negative? Because these false positive, false negatives are going to occur in our network. So the complexity of both of these networks must be understood and the risks must be considered. I think innovation is going to continue. 5G is being innovated constantly. The next generation coming up is 6G. AI, there is innovation going on at an hourly level, right? If you follow the LLMs, you know that pretty much every week there's a new LLM out. The question is, how are we going to harness that innovation to our advantage and to all of the stakeholder satisfaction? We believe this report is the beginning and not the conclusion of work in this area. I believe this is the first report that CSRIC has produced for AI, and I believe this forms a foundation, especially in telecom, on how we want to apply AI. Continued collaboration between industry and FCC is of paramount importance and remains very much essential. We do have two reports, as I've mentioned before. I do want to point out that Jason mentioned that we jettisoned a couple of ideas because we felt that A, we didn't have the time, and B, we did not have the expertise in the current working group. But IoT is one area where I think CSRIC should be interested in. IoT uses the 5G network. IoT can also use the Wi-Fi network. IoT is also embedded in SCADA and other other ecosystems. So I think future CSRICs might consider looking in depth into the security characteristics of IoT devices, how they communicate with the network, and what's the resilience and reliability of those as well. We do discuss 6G in this, in our report, but 6G is still evolving as a standard, but there is information, at least informed information, on how we see some 6G services impacting AI. 6G is called native AI. It has AI from the beginning to the end. So I think we need to pay more attention to the 6G network as it evolves and incorporates AI. Other than that, I want to again take the opportunity to thank the CSRIC Council for giving us this chance, all the working group members who spent many a night creating slides that Jason and I were exhorting them to do, and of course our editors that spend many a weekend making sure that the paper is in the form that you see in front of you. Thank you.
The floor is open for comments. Thank you for a very comprehensive report. I learned a ton. No comments? Oh, okay. I can't see who they are. Tim Schramm, would you like to make a comment?
My question is, how does the consumer identify country origin of an AI-generated product?
So that's an interesting question, and you can look at it from the technical perspective, or you can look at it from a business perspective. I think from the technical perspective, if you look at large language models, the ecosystem is such that many of these large language models are open source. The weights are distributed openly, so country of origin in that case probably is hard to control if this is an open source model. Country of origin might be a little bit more amenable to control if it's a closed source model or if it's a model being distributed by companies. So that's one way to answer that question. The other way to answer that question is, of course, business deals or political deals that can be made with countries or different corporations in order to see how we can provide provenance for that model and how we can make that process much more transparent, that everybody's informed.
I guess one more comment. I guess in many ways, models could be sort of perceived as an implementation detail within a system. And so the consumer of a system has certain expectations in terms of behaviors of the system. And so then the system provider needs to be testing the model as part of the actual system testing processes. And maybe, I guess I'd be interested, if this was a longer discussion, I would be interested to understand the specific concerns with the actual origin of the actual country of origin of the model. But I think that's sort of another way to look at the problem as well.
Thank you.
Tom Good.
Thank you. My name's Tom Good. I'm representing Addis on the CSRIC. I'm Addis's alternate. Susan Miller's our primary, who couldn't attend today's meeting. We appreciate the opportunity to provide input onto the draft AI machine learning reports, and also appreciate the enormous amount of work that went into development of the report. Addis wasn't selected to be on the group, but we do have a tremendous amount of work in this area, robust work area activity. And based on that experience, we have proposed some edits to the report to bring greater clarity to the document, and specifically to highlight two areas that we believe warrant additional emphasis. We have provided this input to the working group chairs as requested in the June 2nd email with it circulating the deliverable. But it was requested that Addis provide this input directly to the CSRIC. And given the technical nature of it, we have Ian Deacon, Addis principal technologist, on the call. Ian's led Addis's work on this area and can explain their proposed edits and answer any questions. And with that, Ian, I'll turn it over to you to provide an intro.
Yeah, thank you very much. I suppose, as Tom indicated, these edits are not substantive in nature, and we aim to respect the content that was already in there. But we wanted to bring greater clarity to two specific areas that we believe would warrant additional emphasis within the report. The first point is related to AI data source, identity, and provenance. This was touched on within the document, but we believe it's important to be more clearly called out the role of AI data source as an identifier to address mitigating AI manipulation and ensuring data integrity. We made some suggested edits in sections there that could more clearly or more explicitly strengthen trust in AI data sources by integrating a cryptographic provenance metadata alongside the encrypted payloads, so that it would ensure that both human and machines could verify the integrity of the origin of the AI data. So that's really the first one, and we just made some slight edits just to sort of strengthen the wording in that area. I can cover the second point, but if you have any questions related to that, I'm not sure if you wanted to maybe ask questions on that, or would I just cover the second point next?
No, let's take the feedback one at a time if we can.
Sure. Yes, I do have a question that might require maybe a subsequent call between us to understand the nature of the data provenance. As you can imagine, different AIs use different types of data. If you have an AI model that is trained on data that is derived by the service provider from the network, then the provenance of that data is within the purview of that service provider. On the other hand, if you have a model, let's say a large language model that's running in an OSS, then providing provenance for the data on which it's trained is definitely outside the scope of the service provider. And so I would like to better understand how you view the provenance to be applied, where do you view it to be applied, and whether or not it can be applied uniformly across every model that is being used in 5G.
Certainly, and I think you're quite right. I mean, it obviously is quite challenging depending on where it is. But again, just the text that we submitted was that, to strive to be able to actually be able to have a way to be able to identify the source and maybe have identifiable sort of cryptographic binding between that source and the information that could actually allow you to be able to identify the source of it. But certainly happy to take that up, BJ, offline if it helps. But there were just recommendations to help kind of bring some clarity into those sections, and hopefully if the group think they're acceptable, to include that, that would be good. But if it detracts from the current text, we understand.
Can I guess in many ways, I just want to check, you're asking for this to be a consideration of somebody that's potentially developing a model as opposed to an absolute requirement. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah. We're trying to be helpful in the process, of course.
So are we
Sure.
Are we good with that?
I think we can maybe wordsmith something in, and probably in the interest of time, the best thing might be for the chairs and you to have a short call so that we can understand what goes in and the editors can then reflect that understanding.
All right, let's talk about the second piece of feedback now, the PQE.
Yeah, so on the quantum safe cryptography, in sections it discusses cryptography vulnerabilities, and so we've noticed the need to address broader migration to quantum safe cryptography. And I suppose generally speaking, this covers two areas: symmetric key cryptography, which is commonly used for encryption and hashing for data that secures the data in transit or data at rest, whereas the asymmetric key cryptography, or PKI, is commonly referred to, typically is used for identity and authentication. So the document currently only refers to PQC standards by NIST, which are typically the asymmetric cryptography replacements, and it's not addressing the transition to quantum safe cryptography for data at rest or in transit, which is, again, the symmetric key ones. And our suggestion was maybe to align with the NSA's CNSA 2.0, the National Secure Algorithm Suite 2.0 requirements, which covers all of these areas really for symmetric key and hashing as well. And so then on top of that, additionally, ATIS, together with the industry, conducted an extensive assessment of the cryptography implemented across the 5G architecture, where we identified the relevant quantum safe cryptography for protecting the 5G infrastructure from quantum adversaries in the future. We produced a paper that outlines the recommendations for this transition and made those recommendations to 3GPP of how they could implement a phased migration to address the most critical vulnerabilities first, for example, harvest now, decrypt later, and implementing the specific cryptography that meets CNSA 2.0 requirements. So again, our suggestion would be to refer to the CNSA 2.0 requirements, and maybe, again, just for consistency, because this paper is looking at AI on the 5G architecture, to refer to the paper that we put forward, just for consistency. So I think there's 2 points in that. One, to be kind of more clear on kind of the symmetric key encryption migration, and potentially referring to the requirements from CNSA, and maybe using the proposed recommendations that we made in the ATIS report.
So a couple of thoughts. First of all, just for the General Counsel, obviously the area of sort of quantum computing is still evolving. So some people might ask, why would you want to think about sort of encryption when the technology is not there? One of the actual threats that sort of needs to be considered now is this idea of harvest now, decrypt later, which sort of implies that you can be collecting encrypted data now with the view that in the future, if quantum computing does in fact enable you to actually break the encryption keys, you could then decrypt the data. So that's why there is some requirement now to be considered. The paper itself did not, to my recollection, go into any specifics around specific encryption technologies, AES or RSA. And so therefore, my immediate reaction would be spending too much time in the paper talking about AES, RSA, or PQE, or sort of anything along those lines would sort of possibly take us in a direction that may be out of scope. I am wondering, and I'd love to get Vijay's thoughts here as well, number one, we were thinking this could be a potential area for a future CSRIC to actually consider, because it's obviously a critical space to be thinking about. Potentially, we could also add some references content. I don't know where best to actually put it, where we could actually just at least cross-reference this as an area that people should be tracking. Vijay, what do you think?
Yeah, by and large, I believe I agree with Jason. I think we do mention quantum cryptography probably 1 or 2 places in the report. It certainly is not within the charter to consider that, but I think if it is easy to add a reference to your document, I think that should not be a problem. And again, if the editor team, yourself, Jason, and I have a conversation, we can put a well, placed reference. That should not be a problem.
Thank you. And as I say, my intention was to try and minimize the edits, and I made a very minimal change and referred to just these two external resources, the CNSA 2.0 and the ATIS document, to minimize the amount of text that would need to sort of be in the report. So I think we're aligned in that. So certainly happy to help offline on kind of working on the text to be appropriate.
Great, thank you.
I will start an email chain between us, among all of us, later on today, and then hopefully we can converge on a time to talk briefly tomorrow.
Excellent, thank you. Now, I did actually add some additional sort of small edits in there, but they were just for your consideration, just maybe some typos. So that covers everything that we put forward as recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Daly?
Yes, thank you very much, Brian Daly of AT&T, and also one of the Working Group 3 co-chairs. First, Jason and Vijay, just like to commend you and the group for a very comprehensive report. And as you noted, there are a lot of areas that overlap with Working Group 3 that we are also addressing, and that includes post-quantum as well, of course, as 6G, which is our charter. So we already are looking at some of those areas and definitely will be included within our report. The one thing I would like to, for this particular report, to discuss is one thing you mentioned, Jason, about 3GPP mandating NWDAF and the fact that NWDAF has seen slow rollout. First, I'd like to remove the word mandate when we're talking about 3GPP specifications, because they are just that, specifications that guide development and not mandates. But in particular, along those lines, I'd like to, focus on Section 5143 and the mitigation strategies and recommendations. In the bullet item under data protection, I think in this area, it goes a little bit too much into the details of implementation. While we would agree that, with the concept that data sources at rest and in transit should be encrypted and their integrity protected as appropriate, I think the rest of that paragraph really goes into detail about specific implementation choices, and I think we should focus more on the outcomes, not specific tools that would get to those outcomes. So our recommendation, again, and we'll forward this to you, would be to remove that paragraph or that portion of the paragraph where it gets into the details more of the implementation and deployment options that may be available, because certainly there could be different choices to achieve the same outcome. So I will forward the proposed changes to you and give that for you and the group's consideration. Thank you.
Actually, Brian, thank you for the feedback. Can you just so we're clear, we've got the report in front of us, which specific paragraph is it you're asking us to actually focus on?
It's the data protection bullet that starts with the heading data protection.
So encryption, and integrity, protection of data to help prevent the usage and manipulation of that data.
Yeah, that definitely agree with, and also data sources at rest and in transit should be encrypted and their integrity protected. And we would propose to add the word as appropriate there. But the rest of that paragraph up to the last sentence, I think, goes a little bit more into the detail and deployment options. And we would prefer just to keep it really at what the outcome should be and not get into the specific tools for achieving those outcomes.
So there's the second part of the paragraph where it talks about data being transferred between NWDAFs. That's the concern, is that right?
That's right. I think the last sentence is fine where it says applicable standardization mechanisms defined by 3GPP should be leveraged where possible. I think it's okay to leave that sentence in. But everything starting with data sources in transit up to that last sentence, I think goes a little bit more into specific tools rather than just speaking about what the outcome and strategy should be.
So what about if we, so it sounds like you're fine with data sources at rest and in transit being encrypted and their integrity protected as appropriate. If we then
Yes.
give examples of data sources being system telemetry, interactions between systems, test and training data, and just sort of give a list of specific sort of sets of data that could be considered?
I think that's fine. Yeah, as examples, that would be
Yep.
all right.
And then it also includes data. So I guess it's the NWDAF specific aspects of this that you're reacting to. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, more on that and more that gets into architectures and implementations. I think is going a little bit more too detailed.
And I think, and then just one thing to note, in this case, in this section, NWDAF in general is just meant to be an example of a standardized approach for actually emitting telemetry for lack of anything else. So NWDAF is intended just to be an example, not something that was mandated, which I don't remember using that word. If I did, apologize.
Sorry, Susan just let us know if we need to take this offline in interest of time.
I think we can
this
take it
discussion
offline.
is
Yeah.
important because the council is going to be voting on their report, and they need to know what changes are being made or not made before they vote.
Okay, so thank you for that clarification. Brian, at least in what I am reading, there doesn't seem to be any specific algorithms or architectures that are captured here. It says data sources at rest and transit should be encrypted. It's not mandating or recommending any specific encryption. Data sources, and then it says data sources in transit include all data. So I am trying to understand.
So I think my understanding is, and maybe I'll summarize, I think it sounds like Brian's fine with us talking about encryption, integrity, protection of data,
Right.
at rest and in transit, and then giving examples of data like telemetry, training data, models, etc. I think it's the NWDAF as the architecture sort of, or the implementation sort of concern that he's servicing. So I think if we removed NWDAF, or maybe NWDAF is just an example, Brian, would that also
Can
sort
you
of
note in the report that NWDAF is an example? If they add the language that is merely an example, does that work, Brian?
Yeah, I think if we can just state that this could be one.
And I think it does, earlier on in the paper, we do mention that that's just one example of an implementation technology, but happy to take another look
Yeah, I
at that
think
with
it's
you,
important. Yeah, I think it's important here where we talk about the mitigation strategies and recommendations to really be a bit specific there. So.
I'm trying to find, there is somewhere earlier in the paper where we actually explicitly state NWDAF is just intended to be one example and not the actual, not mandated, nor the only approach. I can't find it right now, but.
We can ensure that's the case.
Yeah.
And, circle back to you so that we can close this.
Perfect. Excellent. Brian, is that good with you?
Yeah, you're going to circle back then? Yeah, that's fine.
Great. Hey, thank you for taking the time.
The discussion of NWDAF starts on page 32. Do you see it, Jason?
Yeah, I do, but I don't think that's necessarily what Brian's
No.
reacting to. I mean,
Yeah, I know, but
okay.
I don't see any language there at the beginning of the discussion of it, that it's an example. So
All right. We're happy to take another look. If it's not just mentioned as an example, in section 32, on page 32, where we introduce NWDAF, maybe there we can just sort of explain that it's the one standardized approach for actually emitting telemetry that's currently covered, and then make the other changes that Brian had sort of discussed. VJ, does that work for you?
Yes.
Brian, did you hear that?
I did, yes. Yeah, that seems like it'll be sufficient, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No further discussions or questions? Okay. So I'm going to put this up for a vote. Those in favor of adopting the report, and importantly, with the agreed upon amendments and editorial rights reserved, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, say nay. Okay, no nays, the ayes have it, and the report is adopted. Thank you. Great, moving on to Working Group 2, Brandon and Stephen.
Yes, hello. In person, I'm Brandon Abley, Chief Technology Officer for NINA, the 911 Association, and co-chair of this working group. I believe my co-chair, Mr. Hayes, is online.
Hello.
Okay, give me a moment to sync up my notes here with the slides. Okay. So we have our first report that's due to the CSRIC for consideration today. It was an honor to co-chair this effort. We had a tremendous group of people that contributed from all sides of public and private interests in 911. I can commiserate with our colleagues in Working Group 1 that there was a lot on the table that we weren't able to get to because of the limited time frame that we had to work on this first report. But we have taken notes, and some of these topics we have reserved to consider for the second report that's due in March of 2026. And we'll have some, I will kind of go into how we scoped out these two reports ahead of time in a moment. So this first report is a report and recommendations on best practices for connecting stalled 911 calls through alternative network options. That's what's before you today. I won't read all of the sub-bullet points in detail. You can see them on the screen, and this all comes from the charter. The second report that we'll begin working on is the report on recommendations for preventing adverse impacts on PSAPs and NG 911 from 911 calls made through alternative network options. And we had to be very strict working on this first report in terms of controlling our scope, because we're only going a certain way through the call path with this first report. So there's a lot that we had to think about that we put on the shelf until our second report. Next slide, please. We have all of our working group members here on the screen. Unlike the first meeting, I don't believe I need to read all of them and announce the membership, so I can spare everybody, but their names are here on the slides. A lot of familiar names in 911, a lot of good colleagues and friends of mine personally that are on this list. Next slide, please, and we have our alternates. So this graphic summarizes the upcoming slides with an illustration, but also displays the scope of our first and second reports. We can see the domains here from the user, the network, the NG911 system, and ultimately the PSAP. We see that there's some intersection with the alternate access methods, and I'll go through each of them in the following slides. But once we get to the second report, that scope involving the recommendations and user devices will be left behind. Next slide, please. So the access technologies we evaluated, and I will be honest, most of these focused on wireless access methods, and I'll explain why in more detail in a moment, but in no particular order. We looked at MSS, mobile satellite service, supplemental coverage from space, Sidelink, private cellular networks, CBRS, of course CMRS, VoIP, and Wi-Fi to some extent. Next slide. So those of you that remember the previous CSRIC, a lot of us were part of that one as well. We had the 911 working group was focused specifically and strictly in 911 access via Wi-Fi. So when we sat down to scope what we were looking at for this report, we reviewed the previous CSRIC 8 reports and determined that the state of the art has not changed substantially enough for us to investigate alternative access methods over Wi-Fi for the most part. We stand by the recommendations that the previous CSRIC had adopted. Next slide, please. A lot of this report focuses on CMRS, commercial mobile radio service, and FCC parlance to regular human beings. We call them cellular networks. It's the preferred access method for the majority of emergency calls. We have statistics from both the FCC and NENA that are close, not exactly the same, but it hovers around 80% of 911 calls are wireless at this point, and that figure is always steadily going up. But I have to give credit, much credit to the Commission. Maybe I have unusual interests, but that annual fee report that the Commission puts out is my favorite document every year. Just sharing some of my personal preferences here. So typically, CMRS services use terrestrial base stations. The emergency calling procedures are very well specified. Again, this is the most common modality. Our voice is the most common modality. We do have alternate modalities that are very important. Of course, text. We have some multimedia over the top. We have multimedia working in test networks, but the native NG911 multimedia is not being delivered at this point. I'm proud to report that NENA's mid-year industry collaboration event is going on as we speak, and they're testing some of this stuff between approximately 40 vendors, as I last recall, and I can't observe because I'm here, but I'm very much looking forward to the results of this 3-day test. We note coverage challenges in some rural or indoor environments, and of course, emergency calls continue to be supported in 6G. And we get into some of the specific alternate methods for CMRS in a moment, so please stand by. Next slide, please. So we looked at fixed and non-fixed VoIP. We considered 3 cases. The case A was direct routing to an EZUNet and PSAP through the ISP, possibly over the internet. Case B was routing of a call to a CMRS network who processes and forwards the call to an NG911 emergency services network. And case C is routing of the call to a VSP with a VPC who processes and forwards the call to either type of E911 or NG911 emergency services network. Cases A and B were covered under CSRIC 8's report on emergency calls over Wi-Fi, and we do not have any new recommendations after reviewing the previous work. Case C is typically over the top, and we did not form any recommendations for this 3rd case in this report either. That may change with the 2nd report when we get into the interactions with the NG911 system. Next slide, please. We have some findings and research provided to the Commission on supplemental coverage from space. It's currently being rolled out by major operators. As of the time that we were writing the report, all 3 major carriers had made announcements, major wireless carriers had made announcements that they were providing some sort of SCS service. It works with select smartphones on the market today. I have to say that above and beyond what we covered, there's a wealth of information on the record from the Commission's recent proceedings on the issue that we certainly recommend interested parties look into. One of the things that stood out to us is that there's a variant of SCS called NTN that has been standardized. It has not been deployed yet. It includes standards enhancements for better satellite support. It may use either terrestrial or satellite spectrum, but the regulatory framework is unclear at this moment. The recommendations in the report provide some advice to the FCC on what it may consider in the future in this regard. Next slide. We have some coverage of mobile satellite service as an alternate access method. Historically, these have been standalone devices but are being integrated into smartphones. A big distinction between SCS and MSS right now is the type of spectrum that they use to access. Again, these services on smartphones are currently limited to text, and that may evolve, and the regulatory requirements between the two are different. One thing in our findings we tried to thread the needle between making a report to the FCC and also making a report that the general public or non-experts might read. So there is some information in the findings that may seem unusual to report back to the FCC because the Commission knows its rules, but we wanted to cover all audiences in that respect. Next slide, please. So SideLink provides a really interesting use case as an alternate method to be able to make an emergency call at some point in the future. That's a big caveat. It allows a device that is out of coverage to relay communications through a device that is in coverage. And these links can be daisy-chained over multiple links, so you can extend the coverage of donor devices quite far, theoretically. There are many names for SideLink as marketed. Peer-to-peer, D2D, Prose, and PC5 are examples. A lot of us that are familiar with SideLink know that it was originally developed for emergency responders to do mission-critical communications for all sorts of different use cases. But it does exist in the standards to use SideLink for commercial users, and also specifically some provisions for emergency calls in commercial networks, which is covered in a report. It is some time before this sort of use case hits the market. One of our recommendations is that the FCC continues investigating this use case. I'll get to the specific wording of the recommendation later, but of course you also have the report in front of you. Hopefully. I failed to print out the previous report, so I was scrambling during the meeting to retrieve Suzanne's email. So we have some findings on CBRS, Citizens Broadband Radio Service. Next slide, please. So CBRS networks typically fall into a few categories. I won't read all of this text in the interest of time, but what this comes down to is that the typical CBRS implementations are a private CBRS network, usually data only, a neutral CBRS host network, fixed wireless access, and mobility network enhancement. So depending on the types of service that are offered over CBRS, and also on the following one we'll get to with private cellular networks, the requirements to be able to make emergency calls change, and the alternate access methods change. So we do have some findings that report on those alternative access procedures. Next slide, please. The next section of our findings goes into private cellular networks and alternative access methods and that use case. It's typically used for communications within a specialized environment, are typically used for data-only communications, but emergency services report is required when voice is supported and the device is attached and interconnected with the PSTN, which is not a typical use case, but we were aware of some implementations that implemented a private cellular network in this regard. And there are some interesting caveats in terms of, for example, being able to place a call if you are out of service of your home carrier, but you are covered by a private cellular network that is interconnected with the PSTN. So we document some of those edge cases that may come up and provided those findings in our report. It was a really interesting thing to look at, and there were some use cases I was not thinking about when we started the work. Next slide, please, and we're getting close to our conclusion. So we have some somewhat extensive reporting on exactly how network selection works to explain some of the built-in mechanisms that are already there for what you would think of as alternative network means. There are a lot of things that a device does to try and find the best available network when in standby and also when placing an emergency call. We document how a lot of that works to sort of explain to the commission that there's a lot of work that mobile devices and mobile networks are already doing to handle some of these cases to prevent a call from being stalled in the first place. Next slide, and we get into our recommendations. Our recommendations are split up into two parts. We have recommendations for the FCC, and then we have recommendations for the industry that may have interest in reading this report, because some of our findings are things that are outside of the commission's scope. The first recommendation is that we reiterate the recommendations from the previous CSRIC 8 report on emergency services over Wi-Fi, and we stand by that report. We do request investigating the regulatory clarity for NTN. SCS, as we mentioned, uses terrestrial spectrum, MSS uses satellite spectrum, and NTN, depending on integration, could use either. So we recommend clarifying the regulatory requirements for that use case. We did notice the regulatory treatment of SCS and MSS is different, which is appropriate to some extent, but the user may not know or care which type of service is being used. So it may be confusing if they have different emergency services requirements and work differently. So we recommend investigating, harmonizing the requirements for smartphone use. Next slide, please. We have recommendations with respect to SideLink. We do recommend that the FCC investigate the advantages and obstacles to widespread commercial deployment of emergency calls over SideLink, noting it will be a number of years before SideLink is commercially available to consumers. It's currently in an early stage of implementation with field responders on dedicated mission-critical services networks today. So this is not necessarily something that we're going to see tomorrow, but it might be something that the commission, for example, would consider issuing an inquiry on and gathering information. Our final recommendations with regard to CBRS and private cellular networks with PSTN interconnection is that the FCC makes efforts to raise awareness and make clear the obligations of CBRS and private cellular networks with respect to supporting emergency services. And next slide is our last set of recommendations for the FCC. We have some recommendations with respect to non-service initialized or NSI devices. CMRS networks allow, depending on local regulation, support of emergency calls without a valid subscription. We know this. This has been the case for a long time, but this capability does not necessarily exist for the alternative access methods that we covered in our reports. And so we recommend that the FCC study this issue. Our final recommendation is regarding use of relay services. Some alternate accesses may route calls via relay service. It is recommended that the user is not explicitly inform that the relay service is being used to avoid consumer confusion. All they care about is that their call is getting answered, even if it needs to be transferred. Our final two slides are recommendations towards industry. One of our prompts was how users are informed and which sorts of prompts are provided to the user. Due to the complexity of the network selection process and that the behavior may vary depending on the technology supported and the radio environment and the expected usage of the device, we decline to be prescriptive, typo here, in describing the UI. It's recommended that there be sufficient user feedback or guidance to prevent frustration or abandoned calls. The way the user is informed about what's happening and to which extent gets very different when you're connecting through a satellite, for example, versus trying to make a voice call and it just keeps ringing, right? We try to tell people not to hang up because they'll go to the back of the queue. But when the device is searching for a satellite signal and trying to send the text through space, the user should be informed that that's working and what expectations they should have. Yeah, I won't get into that thought. That's not in the report. It's recommended to provide sufficient guidance and information when switching modalities, again, to keep the user informed and avoid confusion. Most interfaces do this, but this recommendation is being endorsed by the CSRIC, provided that this report is approved. It's also recommended that service providers and OEMs take steps to educate the customer that emergency call services, when using alternate access, may have limitations and what those limitations are, especially if the scope of the technologies used for alternate access continues to increase. And our final slide, please. One of our recommendations towards the industry is with respect to overrides. This is pretty much what happens today with a typical call, that the device overrides user configured preferences. You know, we know things like if you have your Wi-Fi turned off when you dial 911 on your cell phone, it'll turn it on to assist with location services, that kind of thing. But the overrides get different and more complicated with these new technologies for alternate access, and we just recommend that that convention is carried forward. Finally, with information delivered to the PSAP, we recommend that 911 calls made using the additional technology solutions described in this report attempt to deliver the same information to a PSAP that is already supported by calls made using terrestrial CMRS networks. And this is where, in my opinion, the standards for next generation call types get very important because we have a significant amount of information that is involved with the call and different types of media that will be sent with the call that will be supported on the terrestrial network. Again, satellite access right now is limited, but ultimately we recommend that the user experience is the same even when using an alternate access network outside of a conventional call. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Hopefully everyone has had the opportunity to read the report. I know I had one comment via email from Mr. Barnes, but I conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Mike?
Hi, it's Mike Barnes with Maveneer. So my question, and Brandon, you mentioned, by the way, the report was great. I learned a lot. I am not technical on 911, and I actually learned a lot. It was quite interesting to me, things to think about. And you mentioned there was the technical information and the more general public information in the paper, in the report. What I'd suggest is add a section at the front for the non-technical reader, just kind of summing up what is the problem, what are the things. So my notes were like, just describe a non-connected call, or what is it we're really trying to do. And somewhat related to this is the title of the report says stalled calls, but that's not really a technical term, I don't think, right? So you should explain that in there too, to say, well, this is what a stall call is. Because I wondered about that, and then I discussed it with you guys and realized, okay, this is what it is, really. So 2 recommendations: a small summary for the non-technical user, and then what is a stalled call? What does that really mean?
Okay, getting that down. So, just to clarify, the request is to add maybe in the introduction section, a more general audience, non-technical summary of what the report is really about.
Yes.
Otherwise, yes, that reader can get lost immediately.
In which I did, but then I read it again and go, I get it now. Yeah, if I had that just a little bit to kind of tie things together at the beginning, or to introduce what you're going to talk about, but exactly what I'm saying, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Taking a note right now.
This is Stephen Hayes. I'm the other co-chair. One thing I think that is important to realize is that the smartphones we have right now are multi-access devices. And the basic issue that we're trying to solve is that we're increasing the number of alternate accesses that exist. And these are being handled by a network selection process that's continuously being stretched as we add more access and has to look at more possibilities for connection. So I don't think it's actually a stall call. What we see is that the selection process may take longer and longer. So it will look somewhat to the user like things may be stalled, but we actually don't have a stall. We just have a stretched out selection period where it's trying to figure out what the optimal access is and trying to make those connections. So I think we can add an explanation then that what we mean by stalled is just an extended connection period.
That's perfect. Thanks,
Yeah.
Stephen. Yeah, that's perfect. So.
Any other comments? No more? Okay. So again, I'm going to call for vote, and those in favor of adopting the report, again, with the couple agreed upon amendments and editorial rights reserved, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Please say nay. Great. Passed. Thank you very much. Awesome job.
Thank you.
And I think now we've got Brian and George are going to present the Working Group 3 update.
Yes, hi. This is Brian Daly of AT&T again. I don't believe George was able to make the call today, but on behalf of George and myself, we would like to present our update on Working Group 3, which is preparing for 6G security and reliability. Just a quick reminder of our working group charter and tasks. We are to look at the security and reliability risks that are unique to the emerging 6G networks and services, and looking at a plan for the development and deployment of reliable and secure 6G networks and services that minimize the privacy risks. I'm not going to go through each bullet on here, but our milestone is a report which is due in December of this year, and that'll look at, again, the potential security and reliability risks as well as recommendations for mitigation. Next slide, please. Again, I won't go through each individual member other than to acknowledge that we have had, good participation in our working group calls. We have, excellent input and discussions, and also want to recognize Kenneth Carlberg, our FCC liaison, who's taken over from Jeff, and to thank him for being on the calls as well. Next slide, please. And we do have a number of alternates. I do want to just bring up Scott Paretsky from Ericsson, who is a new alternate, replacing the former Ericsson alternate representative. Next slide. So as far as our status, we are continuing having our biweekly virtual meetings. During the period since the last report, we did have one subject matter expert from AT&T talk about zero trust for 6G, giving an operator perspective, and I'll highlight some of those during today's discussion. And again, our working group deliverable is in progress. We are populating the document with text, and again, we're on target for complete later this year. Next slide, please. So this slide I presented, I believe, in the past couple of meetings. It's just to level set everybody on the 6G timelines, use cases, architecture, and features that are being discussed. The ITUR timeline is what's really driving to IMT 2030, which is known as 6G within 3GPP. That's in the process of developing their performance requirements, which will come out next year. Once those are developed, the evaluation and consensus building process, as well as specifications developed by 3GPP, will occur. Those will feed back into the ITUR for evaluation and final approval of the IMT 2030 specifications. Again, there's a number of new capabilities that are being brought into IMT 2030, but security, resiliency are front and center, as you see on the wheel. And there's a number of usage scenarios, again, which look at have security requirements such as AI in communication, integrated sensing and communication, as well as just the basic broadband connectivity and latency considerations. Next slide, please. There are a number of documents that have been started within 3GPP looking at the use cases, architecture, and features. There's a study item in 3GPP SA1, which is the requirements group within SA1, that is developing a study focusing on those ITU capabilities and what needs to change within 3GPP. There also are technical studies that there's actually a plenary session of 3GPP this week, and I believe Stephen Hayes was actually at that plenary meeting, and they're working on the work plan for these study items for 3GPP Release 20. Release 21 is going to be the official start of the normative 6G specification work, and that's going to align with the IMT 2030 submission requirements. So we'll see those somewhere around the 28-29 time frame. And then that Release 21 timeline, however, is not going to be finalized, probably no later than 1 year from now in June of 2026. And again, there is a 3GPP technical report on 6G use cases and service requirements, and that's 3GPP TR 22870. And I'll go through some of the highlights of that work in progress during this briefing as well. Next slide. So some of the challenges that we see when it comes to security and resiliency, well, 6G is going to increase the complexity of the network. And as you integrate more diverse technologies, as you scale the network upwards, this is going to expand the attack surface, and also is going to really add complexity into the overall security management of the system. There are a number of emerging threats on the horizon, including advanced cyber attacks, those that are going to target the AI systems. We've already heard about quantum computing risks and the post-quantum era that is on the horizon. There's also the need for continuous monitoring. We need real-time security oversight and rapid response mechanisms so that we can manage these dynamic threats effectively. And data protection, again, we heard this in the AI report as well, but just overall from the entire system, we need to safeguard confidentiality, integrity, and availability of these massive AI-driven data flows. Legacy integration, because we are going to interoperate with existing networks. 5G, is still being deployed. We're still not at the full rollout of 5G capabilities, and that's going to coexist with 6G. So interoperability with these existing networks is going to be another complexity and risk that needs to be mitigated. Of course, we have the supply chain security, which we've heard a lot about. The open architectures like Open RAN will demand rigorous zero trust and vendor security controls to be put into place. And finally, of course, we need to make sure we are compliant with regulatory rules and regulations. We need to adapt to those evolving privacy and cybersecurity regulations, but we also need to continue fostering innovation and making sure that the intersection of those two, while challenging, that we are able to remain in compliance. Next slide, please. So I mentioned 3GPP is doing a study on use cases and service requirements. And again, I want to preface this in the next few slides as it is work in progress. It's not finalized and it is subject to change. So with that, let's take a look at what they're looking at as far as strong security foundations that they're trying to build into 6G for protection of both the network infrastructure as well as the users. And some of the key security goals include securing the core network access and communication. We want to see only authorized elements access the core parts of the 6G network. All communications between those elements have to be protected across all standardized interfaces. The network information needs to be protected. We need to safeguard sensitive network details, including device identities, network structure. We don't want to see unauthorized parties access or misuse that information. Also, we want to prevent unauthorized changes. We need controls in the network that will allow the operators to guarantee the integrity of the network elements. We want to prevent unintended or malicious modifications to anything within the network. And I also already mentioned quantum resistant security measures. As we move into the 6G era, we need to have protections in place to secure critical communication elements like subscriber identifiers and the authentication methods, because we are going to be in a post-quantum era once we get into 6G. And finally, detection of false base stations. We need mechanisms in place so users' devices can distinguish between genuine network base stations and fake or malicious ones that will enhance user safety and trust. False base stations, as the adversaries become more in tune to potential threats to the network, false base stations potentially could be one of the threats that we need to address. So the 6G networks will embed advanced security features throughout the design to maintain confidentiality, integrity, trustworthiness, and will address both current as well as future threats. Next slide, please. So some of the advanced security framework for the next generation networks that is being addressed. Some of the key pillars include robust authentication and secure communication that gives us strong, efficient security across and within operator networks. The next pillar is tailored security isolation and orchestration to give us custom security settings for diverse needs. The next one is proactive threat detection and analysis to enable early risk identification and effective mitigation. And finally, next is dynamic security policy enforcement to allow rapid response and recovery from security incidents. And finally, SIM-based trust anchors for identity management to secure identity verification and access control. Next slide, please. In the area of privacy, We want to align with regulatory requirements as well as operator policy to make sure we safeguard users and subscribers' personal data from unauthorized access or disclosure. And we want to make sure we have robust policy protections whenever any information is shared with third parties. And we want to guarantee trust, compliance, and the highest standards of data security throughout the network operation. The 6G network and network digital twin for enhanced management. We want to design the 6G network to integrate a network digital twin, which is a virtual replica of the entire network and services. And that will enable real-time simulation, monitoring, and management of the network's performance and services. And that will allow us to proactively optimize network operations, predict potential issues before they occur, and deliver superior, more reliable service experience to customers. And this will enhance decision-making agility and operational efficiency and will position the network so that we can bring in the next level intelligence and automation. Next slide, please. We also want to have a resilient network, and we call this a zero outage network. And again, subject to regulatory guidelines and operator policies, it's going to incorporate advanced capabilities to promptly detect, isolate, and recover from network failures. And that'll ensure the stability and reliability of edge network services, even when abnormal transmission issues arise between the public network and edge infrastructure. And that will enhance service continuity and customer experience in dynamic network conditions. We also want to have fast network provisioning to improve the resilience, and this will empower operators to quickly deploy tailored network services within their own networks so that an operator can respond to urgent situations such as disasters, emergencies, or cyber attacks. And this will give a certain degree of local control and enable prioritized functions based on the event and location. And one example of this would be prioritizing voice and data services in affected communities or IoT connectivity in specialized areas like farmlands. And these are expected to be provisioned within hours to users whose experience is impacted so that we can get timely and adaptive network responsiveness when it matters most. Next slide, please. We also want to optimize the 6G infrastructure utilization by having resource exposure in 6G. And this will empower third-party access to computational resources. And this is provided through secure and efficient APIs that will give third parties that are authorized access to real-time availability and information about the resources on the network and the operator's managed data network, such as storage, AI processors, and specialized compute units. And that'll allow partners to seamlessly utilize on-demand computing power, including edge and service elements to run workloads efficiently. Also, the next area is 6G AI agent collaboration with third-party AI using LLMs. And again, this will enable a network to securely and through controlled access to authorized third-party AI agents so that they can interact with services based on defined intents. And that means trusted AIs can get permission to utilize network capabilities safely and effectively and foster innovation and enhance automation while maintaining security and operational control. Next slide, please. The next area is optimizing 6G infrastructure using resource exposure. And again, this is looking at secure and efficient APIs to give third parties access to real-time information about the computational resources within the network. And this will, again, allow that on-demand compute power and edge and services to be used by these third parties to run workloads efficiently. And the next area is to third-party AI using LLMs, secure integration of third-party AI agents in 6G networks to ensure secure policy-based access for authorized third-party AI agents, controlled sharing of AI capabilities and user-related attributes, controlling the identification and authentication of the AI agents linked to users. And this will promote integrated solutions that will meet the evolving business and customer needs. Next slide, please. When we look at the evolution of unmanned, uncrewed aerial vehicles and uncrewed aircraft systems, the secure storage of these systems based on regulatory requirements and user content can be stored in the 6G network, and there's various data that could become from these aerial systems, including sensing, positioning, and related processing results from the data that's retrieved from those devices. This will enable authorized third parties to securely access the relevant UAV or UAM data and ensures compliance, privacy, and controlled data sharing amongst all those stakeholders. The next area is coordinated computing and communication for extended reality. And this would support real-time tracking of trusted computing resources such as edge servers and provide detail on computing service and network capabilities, enable authorized third parties to access resource data securely, and provide efficient on-demand coordination and utilizing of computing assets throughout the network. Next slide, please. So shifting gears a bit, recently there was a joint 3GPP O-RAN Alliance workshop to discuss 6G and the coordination between the two groups on 6G. This was held the end of April in France. And the whole purpose of the workshop was to determine what the collaborative 6G development environment would look like between the two organizations. 3GPP is the lead in the definition of 6G specifications and architecture. The O-RAN Alliance does complement the 3GPP work by developing the front haul as well as lower layer split specifications that would be aligned with the 3GPP specifications and architecture. There also is the need to integrate AI and ML between the network domains. 3GPP is going to define it across the network, whereas the O-RAN is going to align its framework and add complementary AI, ML services, and automation use cases, more specifically within the RAN itself. Whoops. As far as network management and automation, 3GPP does develop the network management systems for the RAN and core network. The O-RAN does advance the service management and orchestration architecture for services specifically for RAN management. And there's a unified security approach that's going to be needed between both organizations to coordinate and establish a consistent and complementary 6G security architecture. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, one of the presentations we had were on the operator views on 6G security, where our AT&T security SME came in and discussed. So when we look at 6G, some of the focus from an operator perspective is reducing the total cost of ownership. We want to enhance the efficiency and automation to lower the operational expenses and maintain high performance. This is all to improve the customer experience, to deliver faster, more reliable, and seamless connectivity, as well as expand the business opportunities to look at new services and revenue streams alongside strengthening and supporting the current offerings. There are a number of challenges that were noted in 5G that need to be addressed in 6G. And some of those, tied directly to network security, network complexity, operational efficiency, capacity, and spectrum, to name just a few on the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. So AI, we heard a lot about that during the first paper that was delivered today. This is certainly one area that's going to be leveraged as we look at security that will be used to automatically detect, respond to, and mitigate security threats in real time. And this is going to help maintain a robust security without needing constant manual intervention. Implementing security controls that are going to be have to be in place to guard against adversarial machine learning attacks or AML attacks. And these are going to be, anticipated sophisticated attacks where the bad actors are going to try to deceive or manipulate AI systems themselves. And when you do that, those systems are vital to maintaining the trustworthiness of an AI-driven 6G operation. So any threat to those AI systems certainly breaks down that trustworthiness of the system. Security measures are going to safeguard the confidentiality, which is the privacy, the integrity, which is the accuracy and trustworthiness, as well as the availability or the reliability of all AI-related data. And that's going to include both the original data sources, the data sets used to train AI models, as well as the models themselves as the data moves across the network. And again, going back to the first paper, we talked a lot about that data in the network and how that needs to be safeguarded. The next area is post-quantum security. As we move into the 2030s, it's anticipated that there will be quantum compute power that's going to break the current cryptographic algorithms. So we need to design cryptographic protocols in 6G that are going to maintain security even in the presence of these powerful quantum computers. And we need to ensure that those new methods work seamlessly with the current communication standards and networks, because we are going to have interoperability between network and network generations, and we need to make sure we have a smooth adoption as we move forward into the 6G realm. We also want to leverage insights. ADIS has done research on prepping 5G for the 5G era. And we also want to influence the global standards, including 3GPP, 5G advanced, as well as 6G, as well as the Open RAN specifications. We need to keep at the forefront of secure network innovation. Next slide, please. Zero trust is one of the pillars of security as we move to 6G. And this gives three benefits from an operator perspective. It gives strong operational security posture. It gives us cost savings as well as technology evolution. Zero trust will significantly enhance the security and flexibility of mobile networks. It is a modern security framework, and it never assumes trust by default, even within the network itself. It will enable mobile operators to gain interoperable and disaggregated network functions with the capability to integrate mobile network operators' zero trust systems and operations. We are pushing the latest global telecom standards, which is 3GPP Release 20. We're going to make sure that we do have this continuous security monitoring capabilities, and it's called SecHand within 3GPP. This standard will ensure ongoing verification of all network activities and make it much harder for threats to go undetected. The O-RAN Alliance and the architecture being developed for Open RAN is also emerging, and it's also an open approach to building mobile networks. And again, as we do that, the O-RAN zero trust design will help to ensure it meets the stringent security requirements before wide deployment. And all of this is to build a future-proof, secure mobile network environment where trust is continuously verified. Each of the components within the architecture are flexible and interoperable, and the standards ensure consistent, high-level protection against emerging threats. Next slide, please. The final area that I want to talk about today is integrated sensing and communications, or ISAC. We looked at one of the ETSI documents, which identifies 18 advanced use cases for ISAC and what the benefits are of those. The figure at the bottom of the screen lists those 18 areas, but they're really highlighted under 5 major categories. Those being healthcare and well-being, communication and sensing optimization, environmental and public safety, industrial and robotics, and transportation and mobility. There's work that's needed to do channel modeling, measurements, evaluation methodology, system and radio access network architectures, as well as the security, privacy, and trustworthiness and sustainability for ISAC. Some of the key enabling technologies are going to be that 6G network itself, edge computing, digital twins, AI/ML, and IoT sensors. You can look at ISAC as information gathered by the sensors, passed to the edge, to the core, and finally up to the application that will process the ISAC data. Next slide, please. So with that, I'll just wrap up with our deliverables and schedule. We are continuing our virtual meetings on a bi-weekly basis. We will continue to bring subject matter expert presentations in on specific topics or research areas. And we do have our Addis workspace where all our documents are managed and also facilitates collaboration between the working group members. We do have a report scheduled for December of this year, and that is on potential security and reliability risks in 6G and recommendations for mitigation. With that, on behalf of George and myself, I'd like to thank everybody for your time today, and that is the summary of where we are.
All right, thank you, Brian, for the great work that Working Group 3 is doing. I want to give you a round of applause, but you didn't turn in a report today, so you don't get that. Yeah. Okay, on behalf of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, I do want to thank the Commission because this is the demonstration of partnership that we like to advocate. You know, there's nonprofit here, there's academia here, there's private industry, and there's every level of government here. This is true partnership and action, and the Commission bringing this to the table is amazing. I do want to also highlight and thank the chair for his comments today, and for Chief Zinji, and for all the work of all the bureaus. You know, this really is about bringing subject matter expertise to the table to consider what are really national security issues. And Chair Carr was right on the money. There are nation-state adversary issues that our nation faces, and you all bring in your expertise to the table, thoughtfully considering, you know, what are the options and what are the recommendations that the Commission can take into account, and then share with interagency partners to bring at least federal government responsible activities that would be helpful to secure the nation in partnership with all of private industry. You know, that is the way that we're going to be able to successfully overcome what I believe is a generational challenge that we have got to face together. So thank you to my co-chair for your leadership, and thank you for all the hard work.
Thank you, Billy Bob. I too would like to reiterate the thanks expressed by Chairman Carr and Chief Nakazawa. I see firsthand how much effort, how much energy goes into producing these reports. I've actually been acting as the liaison in part to Working Group 1 recently because Zenji was, he's become the acting chief of public safety. He has other responsibilities, and I really have been just astounded by how much each member of a working group contributes to the results that we see here when there are votes taken. And I don't want that to get lost. I think that's very important, and I am very grateful for that work. I would also like to note that Stephen Hayes of Ericsson is going to be retiring. He is a longtime CSRIC member and currently a co-chair of Working Group 2 with Brandon. And I'd like to give him a round of applause in appreciation for his work.
Thank you.
Well, we will miss your expertise, Stephen. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing you all again in September. The next meeting is going to be Thursday, the 25th of September at 1 o'clock back here in the commission meeting room. And if you have any questions, give me a shout. And with that, I announce that the 5th meeting of CSRIC 9 is officially closed. Thank you.